People don't make sense of the time periods of when he was militant and when he was peaceful, how, these differences. You saw Spike Lee's film The Shining Black Prince, and
It was an eponymously titled film. The Shining Black Prince is one of Malcolm's names, given to him by Ozzie Davis, who gave his eulogy.
Oh, that's right. Right, you shared that with me, that eulogy. So, I guess I'm telling you, I've heard more about Martin Luther King growing up. But were you equally hearing about both, perhaps?
I never heard of Martin Luther King until much later. I had heard, again, that's probably just a religious difference. I was raised in a Muslim household, so naturally I heard about Malcolm X first.
Right, and I was in an Irish Catholic household and going to Christian Catholic schools all the way through 12th grade. So it's an interesting cultural perspective that sometimes we emphasize one personality or one biography, and then as we get older, we start to learn about all the varying different viewpoints that were part of the same message and the same movement in different ways. Mamadou, you had a question. You had a question for me, and I'm going to do my best to answer it as we wrote it.
Yeah. What were you told, Mr. Hardy, mostly about the civil rights movement, and more importantly, what were you told of Malcolm X and the Black Power movement that followed it? What did you, and what do you now currently think of Malcolm X's philosophy of self-defense, black nationalism, Islam, Pan-Africanism, anti-integration, and genuine brother/sisterhood? Are you aware of what all of these actually mean?
To be honest with you, you name a lot right there, and my awareness is limited. If I'm going to be really honest, my awareness is limited. So that's why I wanted to enter into this conversation with you. This is what I wrote in my response. I said, as a white kid in Northern Virginia, going to a Catholic school through the age of 17, I was less informed of the Muslim narrative of Malcolm X, and likely was prejudiced to it, in the sense that he was the violent alternative to Dr. Martin Luther King. I was told that good Christian people, white and black, were part of the movement of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't know until college that President Kennedy, the first Irish Catholic president, right, was such an obstacle to Martin Luther King and others through the government suspicions and investigations of civil rights leaders. I was told that Malcolm X was part of a Back to Africa campaign of black nationalism, and that other famous people such as Muhammad Ali were part of this Islamic black nationalism as well. But quite honestly, I only knew brief superficial statements about Malcolm X. And I remember in my early college years seeing the 1987 produced series Eyes on the Prize. This documented the civil rights movement and gave me more in-depth awareness, but still it's a documentary awareness, and it's not this lifelong awareness that you seem to have of Malcolm X. So back to you, Mamadou. There's a follow-up question here.
What did you expect to see, Ms. Hardy, when you read the first chapter of Malcolm's autobiography? What was your impression of him after that? What struck you the most about his ideas in the chapter? And what part of his story in that chapter fascinated you the most?
So, for those who aren't familiar, and I wasn't familiar until you introduced it to me, right? Chapter 1, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but chapter 1 has a scene of Malcolm X's mother on the doorstep of his house. Is it Oklahoma?
It's Nebraska.
In Nebraska, okay. So, standing on the doorstep in Nebraska, his pregnant mother, pregnant with him, right? Facing shouting Klansmen out in the yard, right? Ku Klux Klan. His father was a preacher, but was out of town, right? And so here's this pregnant mother defending herself, really her unborn child in the face of this hatred of the Ku Klux Klan. That was part of the scene of chapter 1. And there's a description too of how, well, I'll read in my answer. Let's see if I don't want to I don't want to be too off base, but this is what I remember I'm checking my working memory. Am I learning things from Mamadou? Yes, I am. My first candid impression after reading chapter 1 is that Malcolm X described the accurate feelings and perceptions of the day from his point of view. It made me stop to think about the belief that I have that we all affect change, positive or negative. We all have an effect on one another for better or for worse. The racism of the Klansmen and the hypocrisy of white Christianity described in chapter 1 affected change and motivated action in the life of Malcolm X and so many others like him. It struck me that our first teachers and the shapers of our perspective are our families and our hometowns, how we're treated in our hometown environments. We all carry cultural lenses colored by emotional memories, whether we admit it or not. The idea and image of violence at the start of his life as his pregnant mother stood on his home doorstep facing angry Klansmen shortly after he was born, and shortly before he was born, and violence at the end of the lives of his uncles, his father, eventually himself, it's startling. It's startling to think about, compared to, my own perspective and my own family. I've never experienced a real threat of violence in my life. I guess I could say I did, but outside of this country. That was in college. That's another story. It raises the question I have so often heard reference to Malcolm X. How can one remain nonviolent in the face of so much generational violence? It's also striking to hear Malcolm X speak of the history, culture, and family of himself and any individual like a river of destiny. In a way, we're all swept up by the circumstances so much larger than ourselves in terms of our culture and our perspective. We're born into it. So, thought-provoking. Chapter 1 was thought-provoking in that regard.
Very interesting.
Right. So, our time limit, we've talked about 20 minutes just on chapter 1. But I think this is an example of how the study of the life of one man in the midst of culture and history and a larger movement can help us reflect on the importance and the impact of our own lives. As teacher, as student, both of us play those roles, teacher and student, and how we can continue to affect the circumstances around us just as we gain understanding of those circumstances' effect on us. And that good journalism, understands multiple perspectives.
Absolutely.
And increases an awareness for the reader, hopefully. Increases a curiosity for the reader. Your writing has increased the curiosity for your teacher, as a student journalist. So this is a great exercise to try here, this conversational thinking, this thinking through dialogue. And so thanks for the opportunity. And anybody else listening to this, thank you for listening at least.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Peace.